The guests whispered behind crystal champagne flutes as Emma Wilson walked down the aisle. At 26, she moved with the grace of her modeling days, her white dress worth more than what most people earned in a year. At the altar stood Robert Blackwell, 70 years old, his wrinkled face beaming with pride. His thinning white hair had been carefully styled, and his custom tuxedo hid the signs of age as best money could buy. $2 billion, a guest whispered. That's why she's smiling so much. The Blackwell Grand Hotel ballroom sparkled with wealth. 500 guests watched the unlikely pair exchange vows, but few believed in the love story they were witnessing. Celebrities, business leaders, and politicians had all come, not to celebrate love, but to be seen at the social event of the year. Robert's 3 adult children sat in the front row. James, the oldest at 45, checked his watch every few minutes. Lisa, 42, barely tried to hide her disgust. Thomas, 38, stared at Emma with an odd intensity that wasn't quite hatred and wasn't quite desire. "Do you, Emma Wilson, take Robert Blackwell to be your husband?" the judge asked. "I do," Emma said, her voice clear and confident. Detective Michael Grant stood near the back, uncomfortable in his rented suit. He wasn't a wedding guest type, but Robert had insisted he attend. Grant had handled security for some of Robert's buildings years ago, and the old man had taken a liking to him. "Keep an eye on my kids," Robert had told him earlier that week, slipping him an envelope with more cash than Grant made in a month. "They think I'm a fool for marrying her." The reception was even more lavish than the ceremony. Ice sculptures, rare flowers flown in from 4 continents, and food prepared by chefs with television shows. Grant watched as Emma moved from table to table, playing the perfect bride. She touched guests' arms when they spoke, laughed at their jokes, and made everyone feel special. Robert mostly sat at the main table, accepting congratulations and watching his new wife work the room. "Enjoying the party, Detective?" Thomas Blackwell appeared beside Grant, 2 drinks in hand. He offered one to Grant. "I'm working," Grant said. "At a wedding? Come on, 1 drink won't hurt." When Grant didn't take it, Thomas shrugged and drank both. "Your father seems happy," Grant said. Thomas laughed. "Dad's always been good at seeming things." He nodded toward Emma, who was now taking photos with a famous actor. "You know this is her second name? Emma Wilson. Very clean, very simple. Wonder what she was running from when she changed it." Before Grant could respond, Lisa joined them. "Tommy, stop talking to the help," she said, though her smile never faltered. "Detective Grant isn't help. He's Dad's pet cop," Thomas said. "Whatever. James wants to talk to us before they leave for the honeymoon." Lisa pulled her brother away, throwing a cold smile at Grant over her shoulder. Later, as the party wound down, Grant watched the 3 siblings huddled in conversation on a balcony. Their faces were serious, their gestures sharp with anger. When Emma approached them, they went silent. James said something that made Emma's smile slip for just a moment before she recovered. Robert joined them, putting his arm around Emma's waist. He said something to his children that made them all force smiles. As fireworks exploded overhead, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching the opening scene of a tragedy. Emma and Robert posed for one final photo, her young face glowing, his old eyes triumphant. Behind them, his children watched with cold calculation. The next morning, Robert and Emma boarded his private jet to Italy, where his yacht waited to take them on a Mediterranean honeymoon. She waved to the cameras, the massive diamond on her finger catching the light. 3 days later, she would vanish without a trace. Robert woke with a start. Morning sunlight streamed through the yacht's window. His hand reached across the sheets, finding them empty and cold. Emma had been there when he fell asleep, her back turned to him after another argument about his children. "Emma?" he called, his voice scratchy with sleep and too many cigars. The massive yacht, named Legacy, floated gently in the blue waters off the Amalfi coast. At 180 feet long, it had 6 bedrooms, a pool, and a crew of 12. There were many places she could be. Robert pulled on his silk robe and walked to the bathroom. Empty. He checked the private deck outside their suite. Empty too. A half-finished glass of wine sat on the small table where Emma had been reading the night before. Something tight formed in Robert's chest. He pressed the call button for the captain. "Find my wife," he ordered when Captain Moretti answered. "Now." Within 20 minutes, the entire crew was searching the yacht. They checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. Emma wasn't there. "Sir," Captain Moretti said, standing in the doorway of the master suite where Robert now sat, "we've searched the entire vessel. Mrs. Blackwell is not on board." "That's impossible," Robert snapped. "Check again." The captain shifted uncomfortably. "There's something else, sir. The security cameras, they stopped working last night, from midnight until about 4 a.m. Robert's face went pale. "Get us to Naples immediately. Call the police." 2 hours later, Legacy docked at the marina in Naples. Detective Lucia Romano boarded with 4 officers, her dark eyes scanning everything. "Mr. Blackwell," she said in accented English, "I understand your wife is missing. Tell me everything." Robert explained that they had retired to bed around 11 p.m. after having dinner with a business contact in Positano. They had argued briefly about his children, but nothing serious. He'd had taken a sleeping pill and remembered nothing until morning. "We need to see the security footage," Romano said. "As I told the captain, it malfunctioned," Robert said, his hands trembling slightly. Romano raised an eyebrow. "An unfortunate coincidence." The detective ordered her team to search the yacht thoroughly. In Emma's closet, they found all her clothes neatly hung. Her makeup and jewelry remained untouched in the bathroom, including the expensive diamond earrings Robert had given her as a wedding gift. "Most women planning to leave don't forget their diamonds," Romano noted. Outside on the main deck, an officer called out. Romano and Robert hurried over. The officer pointed to a small reddish-brown stain on the railing. It looked like blood. "This will need to be tested," Romano said. Robert stared at the stain, his face ashen. "Do you think, could she have fallen?" "The railing is quite high, Mr. Blackwell. It would be difficult to fall accidentally." Robert collapsed into a chair, suddenly looking every day of his 70 years. "I need to call my children." In his office, Robert made 3 phone calls. An officer stood nearby, taking notes. Back in America, Detective Grant received a call from the Naples police. 20 minutes later, his phone rang again. "Grant, it's James Blackwell. Have you heard about Emma?" "Just now," Grant said. "I'm sorry." There was a pause. "Are you?" "Tell me, Detective, does it surprise you that a gold digger half father's age might stage her own disappearance?" Grant frowned. The Italian police mentioned blood, James. "A cut finger, perhaps, or something to throw off suspicion. Trust me, Detective Emma Wilson, or whatever her real name is, planned this. Marry the old man, vanish mysteriously, collect insurance or settlement." After hanging up, Grant stared at his phone. Something didn't feel right. He scrolled through the photos he'd taken at the wedding. In one, he had accidentally captured Emma and Thomas in the background, standing too close, her hand on his arm, his eyes intense. Grant booked a flight to Naples. Whatever happened on that yacht, he doubted it was as simple as James suggested, and he needed to know why Thomas had lied about his relationship with his father's bride. Detective Grant arrived in Naples as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the harbor. Detective Romano met him at the marina, her face tired after a long day of questioning the yacht's crew. "Nothing useful from any of them," she told Grant as they walked toward the Legacy. "They all say the same thing. Mrs. Blackwell was a perfect, happy bride." "Too perfect," Grant said. The yacht was sealed with police tape, but Romano led Grant aboard. The crime scene team was finishing their work. The blood on the railing had been confirmed as human, though DNA results would take time. "Mr. Blackwell is staying at the Hotel Excelsior," Romano said. "His children arrived a few hours ago." "All 3 of them?" "Yes, they seem concerned." Grant caught her tone, but not heartbroken. Romano shrugged. Rich families have different ways of showing grief. In the master suite, Grant studied the room where Emma had last been seen. The bed was now stripped, the sheets taken for testing. A novel sat on the nightstand on what would have been Emma's side. Grant opened it, finding a business card used as a bookmark. The card belonged to William Porter, CEO of Porter Investments, Robert Blackwell's biggest rival. "Interesting reading material for a honeymoon," Grant murmured. At the hotel, the Blackwell family had taken over the penthouse suite. Robert sat in a chair overlooking the bay, looking frail. James paced by the windows, while Lisa worked on a laptop. Thomas was nowhere to be seen. Detectives, James said, straightening his expensive suit. Any news? We're still gathering information, Romanov said. Where is your brother? Thomas went for a walk. He's taking this hard, Lisa said without looking up from her computer. Grant studied her. You don't seem particularly upset, Ms. Blackwell. Lisa finally looked up, her eyes cold. Detective, let's not play games. Emma married our father for his money. Now she's vanished. Draw your own conclusions. Lisa, Robert snapped. That's enough. James cleared his throat. What my sister means is that Emma's background raised some red flags. She changed her name 5 years ago. Her previous name was Ashley Cooper. Grant raised an eyebrow. And how did you learn this? We hired someone to look into her after Dad announced the engagement. Did you share this information with your father? Robert answered, his voice weak. They tried. I didn't want to hear it. Lisa closed her laptop. There's something else you should know. Emma can't collect a penny from Dad's estate or insurance. Explain, Romanov said. The prenuptial agreement had a special clause, James said. If Emma disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances within the first year of marriage, a full private investigation would have to be completed before any money changed hands. Dad's lawyer insisted on it, Lisa added. Standard protection for wealthy individuals marrying much younger partners. Grant frowned. So if Emma planned this disappearance for money, she'd have to wait at least a year, which makes no sense, James finished. The hotel room door opened and Thomas entered. He stopped when he saw the detectives. Thomas, Grant said, we need to talk about your relationship with Emma. Thomas's face paled. What do you mean? Grant pulled out his phone and showed Thomas the wedding photo he had taken, the one showing Thomas and Emma standing unusually close. You told me at the wedding you barely knew her, Grant said. This suggests otherwise. Thomas glanced at his father, whose tired eyes had now filled with hurt and anger. Thomas, Robert said quietly, what is this about? Before Thomas could answer, Lisa's phone rang. She answered, listened, then looked up with wide eyes. That was our lawyer, she said. They found something in Emma's banking records. Over the past 3 months, she made 6 transfers totaling $750,000 to an offshore account. Whose account? Romanov asked. Lisa looked directly at Thomas. It's registered to a company called TBX Holdings, Thomas's company. All eyes turned to Thomas, who backed toward the door. I can explain, he said, his voice shaking, but not here. Not like this. Grant stepped between Thomas and the door. I think you'll explain right now. Thomas sank into a chair, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Everyone in the room watched him waiting. Robert's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Emma and I were not having an affair, Thomas finally said. We were working together. Working on what? Grant asked. Thomas took a deep breath. Dad, do you remember the Henderson Tower collapse 3 years ago? Robert's face hardened. A terrible accident. What does that have to do with Emma? It wasn't an accident, Thomas said quietly. Emma found proof. The room fell silent. The Henderson Tower had been a rival development that collapsed during construction, killing 4 workers. The official investigation blamed faulty materials. That's absurd, James cut in. You're making up stories to cover your tracks. Am I? Thomas pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. Emma gave me this the day before the wedding. It contains emails between Dad and the construction company that built Henderson Tower. They were ordered to use cheaper materials than specified. They were told exactly where to cut corners. Robert stood up, his face red with anger. How dare you? My own son. The money Emma sent me, Thomas continued, was to pay a private investigator. She wanted proof before she confronted you. But why would Emma care about a building collapse from years ago? Romanov asked. Thomas looked down at his hands. Her brother was one of the workers who died. The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Grant looked at Robert, whose angry expression had frozen in place. Emma was Ashley Cooper, Thomas said. She changed her name after her brother died. She spent years working her way into Dad's circle, getting close to him, all to find evidence that he was responsible for her brother's death. This is a fantasy, Lisa snapped. Emma was a gold digger who saw an opportunity with Thomas to get even more money. The hotel room door opened again. Diane, Robert's personal assistant for over 20 years, entered carrying a thick folder. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Blackwell," she said, "but there's something you all need to see." Grant noticed how nervous Diane looked, her hands trembling slightly. "What is it, Diane?" Robert asked, his voice weary. "Emma came to my office the day before the wedding," Diane explained. "She showed me documents, proof that someone had accessed your private safe and was stealing company information." "My safe?" Robert looked alarmed. "Who?" Diane placed the folder on the table. "According to Emma, it was Lisa." All eyes turned to Lisa, who laughed sharply. "This is ridiculous. Emma was clearly lying to create suspicion among us." Diane shook her head. "Emma had security footage showing Lisa entering your office at night, using your private key. She also had copies of documents that were missing, documents about the Henderson Tower." Lisa's face paled. "Dad, she's lying. I would never." "There's more," Diane interrupted. "The night before Emma disappeared, she called me from the yacht. She said she had confronted Robert about Henderson Tower, and he had admitted everything. She was scared." Robert's face showed no emotion now, a mask that revealed nothing. "Then where is she?" James demanded. "If she had all this evidence, why disappear?" At that moment, Romano's phone buzzed. She checked it, then looked up at the group. "We found a witness," she said. "A fishing boat captain says he saw a woman matching Emma's description being forced onto a small boat around 2 a.m. the night she disappeared. He said she appeared to be struggling." "Did he see who was with her?" Grant asked. Romano nodded slowly. "A man in a suit. He described him as tall, with gray hair." Everyone looked at Robert, who remained perfectly still, his face unreadable. "That could be many people," James said quickly. "There's one more thing," Romano continued. "The captain took a photo with his phone. It's not very clear, but—" She held up her phone, showing a grainy image of a boat in darkness. A woman's silhouette was visible, and beside her, the outline of a man wearing what appeared to be an expensive watch, one that matched the distinctive gold timepiece on Robert's wrist. "Robert Blackwell," Grant said formally, "we need to continue this conversation at the police station." The police station interview room was small and plain, a stark contrast to the luxury Robert Blackwell was accustomed to. He sat alone at a metal table, his lawyer having been delayed at the airport. Robert had insisted they proceed without him, claiming he had nothing to hide. On the other side of the one-way glass, Grant and Romano watched him. The billionaire appeared calm, occasionally checking his watch, the same distinctive gold timepiece that appeared in the fishing captain's photo. "He's too calm," Romano said. Grant nodded. "Men like Blackwell believe they're untouchable. In his world, money solves everything." They entered the room, and Robert looked up with tired eyes. "Detectives, this is unnecessary. I did not harm my wife." "Then explain the photo," Grant said, placing the fishing captain's grainy image on the table. Robert barely glanced at it. "That could be anyone. The quality is poor." "The watch is very distinctive," Romano pointed out. "It's a Patek Philippe. Expensive, yes, but not unique. Many successful men own one." Grant changed tactics. "Let's talk about the Henderson Tower collapse." A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps fear, crossed Robert's face. "A tragic accident that has nothing to do with Emma's disappearance. Your son seems to think otherwise. Thomas is confused. He's always been the emotional one, easily influenced." The interview continued for nearly an hour, with Robert deflecting every question. As they took a break, an officer handed Romano a file. She read it quickly, her expression changing. "We need to talk to William Porter," she told Grant. "Phone records show Emma called him twice from the yacht the day she disappeared." Porter arrived at the station later that evening, impeccably dressed despite the late hour. In his 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes, he was Robert's longtime business rival. "I've been expecting your call," Porter said as he sat down across from the detectives. "I assume this is about Emma." "You know her," Grant said. "It wasn't a question." Porter nodded. "I've known Ashley Cooper, Emma Wilson, for 5 years. I met her after her brother died in the Henderson Tower collapse." "Did you help her get close to Robert Blackwell?" Romano asked. "Initially, yes," Porter admitted without hesitation. She came to me believing Robert was responsible for her brother's death. I had my suspicions about the collapse as well. It affected one of my investments. I helped her change her identity, introduced her to people in Robert's circle. So she was working for you? Grant asked. Porter shook his head. Not exactly. We had a mutual interest in uncovering the truth. But somewhere along the way, something unexpected happened. She actually fell in love with Robert. Both detectives looked skeptical. I know how it sounds, Porter continued. But about a year ago, Emma stopped sharing information with me. She said she couldn't go through with our plan. She believed Robert was a good man who had been manipulated by someone else in his company. Did she say who? Romanov asked. No, but she was determined to find out. Porter leaned forward. The last time she called me from the yacht, she was terrified. She said she had confronted Robert with evidence about Henderson Tower, but his reaction wasn't what she expected. She said he seemed genuinely shocked, claimed he had no knowledge of the sabotage. Do you believe that? Grant asked. Porter considered the question. Robert Blackwell is many things. Ruthless, ambitious, sometimes cruel in business. But I've known him for 30 years. He wouldn't risk lives for profit. Then who would? Romano asked. Porter's expression darkened. Have you looked into Blackwell's first wife's death? The detectives exchanged glances. It was ruled an accident, Grant said. Yes, 30 years ago. A fall down the stairs at their home. Very convenient for someone who wanted complete control of Blackwell Enterprises. You're suggesting one of the children was involved? Romano asked. James was 15 when his mother died. Within a year he was attending business meetings with his father. By 20 he was making major company decisions. Porter stood up. You asked who would risk lives for profit? James Blackwell has been doing it his entire career. And I believe Emma discovered this. As Porter left, Grant's phone rang. It was the lab with preliminary results from the yacht. The blood on the railing was indeed Emma's. But there was something else. Trace amounts of a powerful sedative were found in the wine glass from Emma's nightstand. She was drugged, Grant said. Romano nodded grimly. I think I know who we need to talk to next. The hotel suite where James Blackwell was staying faced the sea. When Grant and Romano arrived, he was on the balcony, a glass of scotch in hand. He didn't seem surprised to see them. Let me guess, he said, not bothering to stand. My father has accused me of something. Actually, we're here about the sedative found in Emma's wine glass, Grant said. James raised an eyebrow but said nothing. We also spoke with William Porter, Romano added. He had some interesting theories about your mother's death. For the first time, James's confident demeanor cracked. A flash of anger crossed his face before he regained control. Porter has hated our family for decades. He'd say anything to hurt us. Maybe, Grant conceded. But the facts remain. Emma was drugged. She made a phone call saying she feared for her life. And now she's missing. How convenient that all evidence points to my father or me. James swirled his drink. Have you considered that Emma planned this entire situation? That perhaps she's alive somewhere, waiting for the perfect moment to return and claim her victim status. Romano pulled out her phone. We checked marina security footage from nearby ports. No boats matching the one in the fishing captain's photo docked anywhere within 50 miles that night. She showed James a series of images, except for this one. The photos showed a small boat approaching a private dock at 3:47 a.m. A tall figure helped a woman off the boat. Her head was down, her movements sluggish. This dock belongs to a villa registered to LBX International, Romano continued. A subsidiary of Blackwell Enterprises that you personally manage. James stared at the images, his face unreadable. We have a warrant to search the property, Grant said. James set down his glass very carefully. Then I should call my lawyer. You do that, Grant said. But first, explain why you met with this man 2 days before Emma disappeared. He showed James another photo. It showed James in a cafe with a man whose face was partially obscured. Marco Ricci, Romano said. Former military, now works private security, specializes in complicated problems. James's hand trembled slightly. I don't know what you're implying. Lisa hired him, said a voice from the doorway. Thomas stood there, looking exhausted. Lisa hired Richie to scare Emma off, not to kill her, just to make her leave. Thomas, shut up, James hissed. No. Thomas entered the room. I'm done covering for this family. Lisa hired Richie to confront Emma on the yacht. The plan was to threaten her, make her think her life was in danger if she stayed with Dad, but something went wrong. Grant turned to James. Where is Lisa now? I don't know, James said, but his eyes flickered toward his phone on the table. Grant grabbed the phone and checked the recent messages. The last one, sent 30 minutes ago, read, "All taken care of. Meet at the airstrip at midnight." Within an hour, police surrounded a small private airfield outside Naples. A jet with its engines running sat on the tarmac. Lisa Blackwell stood arguing with the pilot, who refused to take off without proper clearance. When she saw the police cars, Lisa ran back toward a waiting SUV. Inside was Marco Ricci, the man from the cafe photo. "Lisa Blackwell," Romano called through a megaphone. "You're surrounded. Surrender peacefully." Lisa froze, then slowly raised her hands. As officers approached to arrest her, she shouted, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She was just supposed to get scared and leave." "Where is Emma?" Grant demanded as they handcuffed her. Lisa's face crumpled. "I don't know. Richie was just supposed to threaten her that night, but she fought back. She fell and hit her head on the railing. There was blood." She looked at Richie. "He said he took her to get medical help quietly, to avoid scandal. That's the last I heard." Richie remained silent, staring straight ahead. "Take them in," Romano ordered. As the officers led them away, she turned to Grant. "Do you believe her?" Grant shook his head. "Not entirely. But I think we're close to the truth." He looked out toward the dark sea. "The question is Emma Wilson still alive? And if she is, where has she been all this time?" His phone rang. It was the forensics team from the villa search. "Detective," the voice said, "you need to come here immediately. We found something." "What?" Grant asked. "Blood. A lot of it, and a woman's clothing. It looks like someone tried very hard to clean it up." Grant met Romano's eyes. "And Robert Blackwell, where is he now?" "Still in custody," she said. "Under suicide watch since we arrested Lisa." "Keep him there," Grant said. "I have a feeling this isn't over yet." 1 week later, Grant stood on the deck of the Legacy yacht. The Mediterranean sun was bright, but the air felt cold to him. Robert Blackwell sat in a chair nearby, looking like he had aged 10 years in 7 days. The police had reluctantly released him due to lack of evidence, though he remained the primary suspect in Emma's disappearance. "I don't understand why we're here," Robert said. "To find the truth," Grant replied. Thomas and James stood at the railing, both looking uncomfortable. Their sister Lisa remained in custody, refusing to say more about what happened that night. Romano joined them carrying a file. "Marco Ricci talked," she said, "in exchange for a reduced sentence." "And?" Grant asked. "He claims Lisa hired him to scare Emma," as she said, "but he insists Emma was alive when he left her at the villa. He says James was waiting there and paid him extra to keep quiet." All eyes turned to James, who raised his hands defensively. "That's a lie. I never." "The blood at the villa matches Emma's," Romano interrupted, "and we found fibers from the dress she was wearing the night she disappeared." "This is absurd," James said. "I had nothing to do with." "The villa's security system was disabled that night," Grant said, "but the neighboring property's cameras were active. They show your car arriving at 3:52 a.m. and leaving at 5:23 a.m. James's face paled. "I want my lawyer." "Your lawyer is already at the station," Romano said. "Officers are waiting to take you in." As police led James away, Robert buried his face in his hands. "My own children," he whispered. "Not all of them," Thomas said quietly. He looked at Grant. "What about the man in the boat, the one with the watch?" Grant turned to Robert. "Mr. Blackwell, where were you between midnight and 4 a.m. the night Emma disappeared?" Before Robert could answer, a helicopter appeared overhead. It circled once, then headed toward Naples. "What now?" Thomas asked. Grant's phone rang. He listened, his expression changing from confusion to shock. "We'll be right there," he said, hanging up. "What is it?" Romano asked. "That was the hospital in Naples. A woman was just brought in by William Porter. She's weak, injured, but alive. She says her name is Emma Blackwell." 30 minutes later, they rushed into the hospital. A doctor led them to a private room where Emma lay in bed, pale but conscious. William Porter sat beside her, holding her hand. "Emma," Robert gasped, moving toward her. Porter stood, blocking his path. "That's close enough," he said coldly. Emma looked at Robert with a mixture of sadness and determination. "Hello, Robert. What happened to you? Where have you been?" Robert asked. "Recovering," she said. "After your son James tried to kill me." Thomas stepped forward. "Emma, we thought you were dead. There was so much blood at the villa. James was angry when he realized I was still alive after Richie brought me there," Emma explained, her voice weak. "He hit me, said I had ruined everything. I managed to escape through a bathroom window. I was hurt, confused from the drugs. I made it to the road where William found me. He's been hiding me while I recovered." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Romanov asked. "Because we needed proof," Porter said, "not just about the attack, but about everything." Emma nodded weakly. "Robert, I know the truth about your wife's death, your first wife." The room went silent. Robert's face drained of color. "James was only 15, Emma continued, "but he was there that night. He saw what happened. He used that knowledge to control you for years. That's why you've protected him," Grant realized. "He witnessed you killing his mother." Robert sank into a chair, looking defeated. "It was an accident," we argued. She fell. "James saw, and he promised not to tell if I gave him what he wanted. Power in the company, protection from consequences. Including the Henderson Tower collapse," Thomas said. "It was James who ordered the cheap materials, wasn't it? Not you." Robert nodded slowly. "I covered it up to protect him. I've been protecting him his whole life." "And when I discovered the truth about both deaths," Emma said, "James realized everything would come out. His role in the tower collapse, his blackmail, everything." Grant turned to Robert. "Robert Blackwell, you're under arrest for the obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact in the Henderson Tower collapse." As officers led Robert away, Emma called out, "Wait." She struggled to sit up. "There's something else you should know. Something I only told William." All eyes turned to her as she placed a hand on her stomach. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. "It's Robert's child." Thomas looked stunned. "So even after everything, the revenge plan, the investigation, you really did love him?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Enough to want justice, not revenge. I never meant for anyone to die." She looked at Grant. "James was going to kill me that night because I told him I was turning over all the evidence I had gathered about his mother's death, about Henderson Tower, everything. I wanted it to end." Grant nodded. "And now it has." As they left the hospital room, Romano asked quietly, "Do you think she's telling the complete truth?" Grant watched Porter through the door window, now holding Emma's hand again protectively. "I think," Grant said carefully, "that every family has its secrets, and the Blackwell family's secrets are finally coming to light, whether they're ready for them or not."